And a good Wednesday to you. Good afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, I am Jason Carlton, pastor of Memorial Missionary Baptist Church in DeQueen, Arkansas. This is our midweek worship service Bible study as we have adjusted to the COVID-19 reality. And we've been coming to you in several different formats, but I wanted to come to you for some time now and have a conversation with my good friend, Pastor Luther Green. So I'll introduce him right quick, and then we'll get started in our conversation. Pastor Luther is a native of North Little Rock, and he is uniquely qualified, I think, to speak about the things that we are going to talk about today because of what's going on in our nation and our past and our present, and hopefully be able at the end to speak to our future also. He is a former United States Marine, is a combat veteran, still deals with some of the fallout of that. He has served in law enforcement. He's been a patrolman with, I believe, the city of North Little Rock. Also was the head of safety for University of Arkansas at Little Rock. He is a graduate of the Missionary Baptist Seminary, also Liberty University, and he and his wife currently serve in North Little Rock with Greater New Hope Baptist Church. He's a father, he's a husband, he's my brother. So Luther, welcome.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you so much.
Luther and I have had some form of this conversation a number of times over the years, with us sitting on our back porches on the phones. It seems like we don't talk enough, but a lot of the times when we do talk, it's been about a flare up of these situations that we've seen into the summer. And I think right off the bat, one of the distinctions that I see in between how different groups of people view this is that when we have a situation like George Floyd, I think there's a tendency among people like me to view these as one-off isolated situations. And it's not viewed that way with our African-American brothers and sisters, because there is a long history. And so I wanted to come into this this afternoon and just my overall goal is to hopefully we can bridge this gap. And there are a lot of voices out there. You can find almost anybody who says and believes anything about this, but I have such a good track record and such a respect for Luther because of his past service, community, military, kingdom work, and I know his heart. And so I wanted to give the opportunity for Luther to speak to some of you guys. Just real briefly before we get to that, just so that anybody maybe on Luther's end that's watching this, sort of my past and my background is that I grew up in the town that I live in now, which is DeQueen, Arkansas, small town by some standards, 6,000 or so. My graduating class was under 100 people, and we were over 90% white. And so I cannot claim any kind of diverse knowledge or experience. My horizons broadened a little bit when I got to college, but it really wasn't until I got to seminary and met Luther and some of our other brothers that I got to know them and spend some real time with them. And we lived life together for 5 years and really came to have an understanding of what diversity is. So Luther, if you want to kind of take it from there, what was your background before we met in seminary?
Well, much like you, Jason, I grew up in North Little Rock, and my view was broadened as well once I grew up. When I grew up, we grew up in an all-Black community, but right beside us was Rose City. It was all encompassed in one area. And so our little side of town was this, and the other side of town was that. And up until around the 7th, 8th grade, we were pretty much, in our own communities, and we would go to schools, and the schools were united. Some of my best friends, and actually, when I was in the first grade, I had my first sleepover, and it was over a guy named Carter Wallace's house, and I remember walking into this big house. Now, mind you, at the time, we lived in projects. We lived in Eastgate Terrace projects. My mother worked at the VA. My dad was in the military off in Germany somewhere by this time. He's a Vietnam vet for the Army. And so we were okay, but we didn't know it. I didn't know. We were in poor neighborhoods. So, but during the first 7 or 8 school grades, we didn't have a whole bunch of interaction other than go to school. But once we hit the 7th, 8th grade, man, we got into sports. and we joined our high school or junior high school teams, and at that time we wouldn't have known the difference. We wouldn't have known the difference in community. We had no problem, man. We were brothers, and we'd get out and we'd struggle on the field together. We walk to the donut shop together in between classes. We go over one of the other brothers' house. It didn't matter what you looked like, what your ethnicity was, but it was just the camaraderie between friends. And we would tease each other. We would rank on each other's parents and families. We played the dozens, all of that good stuff. And we didn't really have a problem until the higher grades when we were getting ready to get out. And I would say more or less after I graduated, high school is where we started seeing some things as far as race. But growing up, it was an amazing thing. Like you said, I grew up, went to the Marine Corps, and there again, it was the same thing. It wasn't black, white. It was dark green light. It was weird how they set it up, because the first thing they did, they wanted to unite us. They shaved all our heads. They stripped us of everything we knew. And they said, from this point on, there's not any division. There's dark green and light green, but it's all green. And so we never really saw anything bad in the units per se, especially during the boot camp. But it was afterward. It would be afterward, being in the city of Jacksonville, North Carolina, there being stationed. And we would start seeing things when you go into the communities. And it would just grow worse. Now, growing up, we didn't have any real connection with police. It was one of those things. Our parents had already told us about it and warned us about it, because when my dad was growing up, it was very segregated, and it was segregated along cultural lines, along residential. It was said for my dad that at a certain time of night you couldn't be out if you were black, and you certainly couldn't be in white neighborhoods. And so if you said you were from a certain particular neighborhood, police officers, they would get you and they would give you probably a beat down. So, but I heard those stories, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to get in law enforcement, was to kind of straighten some of those things out. Plus the fact that by the time I got out of the Marine Corps, there was people in my neighborhood trying to sell drugs, and that wasn't going to happen in our neighborhood. And so we wanted to combat that by actually getting in and serving in the best way possible. But yeah, it was amazing growing up. We grew up as brothers. One of my, matter of fact, I married he and his wife. They just celebrated anniversary the other day. One of my closest friends is Kevin Jones. He's a white guy. This is crazy as he could be. This is funny. And every year from the 10th grade up, we had every class together except for band. And it was funny that we was always, but it was when we grew up, and Kevin and I, we're still really close. But when we grew up, we started seeing some of those other friends and friendships. They kind of drifted away. And Jason, it was hard to kind of figure out what happened. Why is it? And especially today with all of this division from the top down, especially today, I've even had to go into Facebook, and some of those that I thought we were really close, I've seen some of the comments where I just said, I can't look at the comments anymore. So I unfollowed it. But yeah, it's been an amazing journey. We've seen some things that have caused us to differ. And as we go on into the conversation, I may share some of those stories from law enforcement, all the way through being in certain places in the military.
So we could tell stories for hours about all these things. but just, I guess, for the sake of time, and we'll try to compress this. We may have to run this into next week too, and that'll be fine.
Yeah.
But especially, um, 2020 has been so challenging on several levels. I think for everybody, collectively, individually. But we already had enough on our plate with COVID-19, and then there was this national moment of, I don't even know what you want to call it, this crossroads that we're still in right now, precipitated largely by the death of George Floyd, but not just that. As far as your role as pastor, what are some things that you've been sharing with your congregation? And I know maybe sometimes we call those dinner table conversations. There may be things that you say just to your congregation that maybe you wouldn't say to the whole world, and that's family talk. But I know in our congregation, several of the themes that I've been trying to chip away at this summer, and this will be repetitive for our congregation, but maybe for anybody else that's listening, is that we all accept as believers that we're made in the image of God. We bear the image of God. And so to carry that to the New Testament in Galatians 6, we are to bear one another's burdens. And I know you and I have talked about this, that you can't bear your brother's burden if you're not believing what he says about his burden. So if you think he's lying, that his life is hard in some particular aspect, then you have no desire whatsoever to help him if you don't believe him. And so image bearers must be burden bearers. That's a huge theme. And then also the concept of privilege is that we know, and Philippians 2 being my text for this, that Jesus had all the privilege in the world, and he left it and laid it down to come and be with us. And so that sets the pattern for us to be burden bearers who lay down their privilege. But again, kind of the same thing. If you don't acknowledge your privilege, if you don't think that you have privilege, you can't lay it down because you don't think that you have it. So from our perspective, those are some of the things that we talk about. But how do you navigate through this with your congregation there in North Little Rock?
Well, a couple of things are going on with our congregation and with us as a people. One, many of those who are pastors, they've experienced long time, and because of the disparity that they experienced, it had gotten to a point where they had grown numb to it. After having an experience so long, you just start kind of looking at it as the norm if you're not careful. And so what I'm doing now, and one of the things we've been doing through all of this, is kind of letting them know about this reality, that this is real. This is not a dream. You've gotten to a point where all of the social injustice is about to be handled. I'm not going to say it's going to go away. I don't think it'll ever go. I don't think the problem with racism will ever go away, because we live in a world that has wickedness and evil in it. But what I will say, and what I say to the people, I offer them hope that, hey, all of the things that we've experienced, you've forgotten about, even when there are those that we would expect to stand, and we've talked about it several times, where it's just like you said, is that image bearer and that burden bearer, but it's basically, and I've always cried, now, how can you say you love me and you see someone hurting me and you won't stand up to help protect me? And that's what we've experienced. And I'll tell you what, it's amazing, because our people, we're Christians and we love Jesus to the utmost. And we practice all of those, or we strive to practice all of those things that he left on record, especially about loving your enemy, and being kind to those that despitefully use you. And so it's really in this era, or this temperature that we have in the air, is really one that we have to offer hope. We also have to, and I've been encouraging the people not to go about responding in a negative way, because when you've had your neck pressed down for so long, you tend to fight. And we have people who have experienced pretty much hardship, much like my dad taught us early in age. Man, you have to be careful. Be careful of the police. Be careful of society. And really, growing up, it was amazing. I really didn't have to have that problem as much, but it was once I was grown. It was once I turned 18 and I was going off, and I had to hear that talk. I had to hear that talk from my grandmother, my great grandmother, actually. And she was right down the street from us, and she would tell me things to be aware of and to be watchful of. And one of those things was how I'm treated by the Caucasian community, and so those things that really played a part. So what I've been sharing with our people is, listen, one, continue to love, continue to trust God, and worship God, but at the same time, love those and pray for those that despitefully use you. Now, in this climate we're in, it's the biggest problem with our people have been trying to around those connected to them know how bad it's been. Because again, if you don't see my problem as a problem, how can we fix the problem? And so for so long, most of our congregation, they've grown to a place where they said, well, they're not going to listen to our complaint. They're not going to hear our cry. And so it's almost like the children of Israel crying to God, saying, okay, God, we know that you're with us, and how long will you allow our enemies and all of this stuff that David would cry out. And so it's one of those things. I'm just encouraging them to keep trusting God, continue to show love and empathy toward those who may be going through this. And really, this is not a one-time thing. Now, me being a police officer, I know, and I've told the people, and they know everything about my past. And but I've told them that there are certain expectations that we have to have as citizens also. And as little children, okay, you don't go up and police officer stop you. It's the talk. That's what we call it, the talk. I don't know if you guys had to have the talk. You know, when police pull up to you, keep your hands on the steering wheel, look straight ahead. Yes, sir. No, sir, officer. Answer all the questions. Keep your hands, move slow, all of that stuff. And so it's really at a point where our people know, don't celebrate the fact of seeing other people have to suffer through this. It's just part of it. But celebrate the fact that God has stepped up, and now we're seeing all of this come to pass.
Yeah, you hit on something, and you mentioned it several times. And if you didn't bring that up, I was going to. It was, I think, within the past 6 or 9 months or so that I came to that realization that between our two different communities, that the talk means something very different to your community than it does to white families. With us, that's about sex. That's the talk is when parents talk to their kids about sexual responsibility. And for you guys, it's law enforcement. And really, I can't speak for all white families on that, but the first couple of times I heard about the talk, I was like, what does that have to do with law enforcement? But it's a very different thing, and related to a conversation that I had with another pastor friend of ours, and this has been probably 5 years ago. We were just having a conversation about something completely unrelated, but the subject of concealed carry came up, and handguns. And he lives in a major U.S. city, has a concealed carry permit, but he said, I don't carry my gun in my vehicle. And I was like, why? Don't you feel safer? He said, no, I don't really. And then we had a conversation that flowed from that. So I think it's hard sometimes to talk in generalizations, because certainly in this environment, and this is why I think your voice is so important. It's because you understand the law enforcement angle of it. And so your response to that is going to be informed and measured in a way that we don't often get when we watch cable news, whatever your network might be. And so also balled up in all of this is the patriotism issue. And so you come to this where you have sacrificed for your country, and you continue to, because of Gulf War syndrome. You suffer from this in a way that most of my patriotic friends don't. And so this is why I wanted Luther to come in and speak to this, is because you can come at this from so many angles, and man, we need you on some cable news to shed some light here.
Well, and I have, and I always wondered what was it and why was it that God would allow this to be a part of my journey growing up. Man, I tell you, being in law enforcement, I was a police officer. I was good at it. I loved it. First week on the job, 7 felony arrests. My FTO, she would brag, and we'd go back to headquarters, and she'd say, man, this kid is super kid, man. This guy's going to be good. And so law enforcement was never my issue, being able to do it. But being in the ranks, I saw some things that were deplorable. I saw some things that would cause me to really grow mentally sick. But it wasn't always from other police officers, because there were some good guys. Most of the guys were good. We would have maybe a couple of them that were just outlandish, but they were old school, and that's what they had been used to doing. But I remember working security at Dillard's, and they would call and they would give the code over the intercom, pick up and say security, okay. Now I was a police officer, so I had all of the abilities as an officer to make arrests. But I remember one day I picked up the phone and security, and the lady said, we need security to come over by the men's clothing. I said, what's the problem? She said, we have some suspicious looking blacks. And I said, well, what's suspicious about them? Well, they just look like they're up to something. I said, well, have they touched anything? Have they done it? No, they just walked in. And I'm not going to tell you how I responded to that, but I will say we didn't make any arrests that day. but even, being the thing about military, it was really good for me, Jason, because I was able to go all around the world. Italy, Spain, able to go all over the world and able to see many different things. I believe that one of the reasons we have so many problems is that many people who are either racist or don't understand or just don't like another race, they've never been off their porch. And what I mean by that, they've never been outside of that little comfort zone, whether it's their city, whether it's their neighborhoods. So they haven't had a time or a chance to meet people like we have. Yeah. And even when they met people in a classroom setting, it really was only for a moment. Whereas in the military, we lived together, we trained together, we woke up and ate together, we slept together, we had to pray together, not knowing what was going to happen from one day to the next. And so that from that perspective and knowing that, hey, I'm sitting here in a foreign country and all of this stuff going on, don't know what's going to happen in life. And I remember when we went over to Saudi Arabia during the Gulf War, my unit was one of the first units to go out, October of 1990. I had, my daughter was on the way, but they said, you're going anyway. I said, okay, that's fine. And I remember getting over there and my luggage was lost. And I had one song, I want to say I had a cassette player. Yeah. Some of our listeners may not know what cassettes are, but we had a cassette player. There you go. And we were there, and I was on the back of a 5-ton pickup. We were driving down one of the streets in Saudi Arabia. We didn't know one person from the next because over there they all look alike to us. And so you didn't know who was friend, you didn't know who was foe. And I remember there was I want to say Paul Simon, 50 Ways to
yeah. Get out the bag, Jack.
The only song I had. And so this was in my head. Get off the back, Jack. Make a new plan. Stand. I'm like, oh, Lord, this is the only thing I have to look forward to. But it was the hope of God that brought us back. But there was a sense of camaraderie. We knew who the real enemy was. And I'm afraid what's happening in our churches is that we're not identifying the real enemy. See, the real enemy has to deal with hatred. It has to deal with wickedness that's brought about by Satan. We're not at odds with one another, but on any given Sunday, guess what? We're the most segregated places in the world. And I've even gone to certain churches, I won't name them, where I walked up in order to go in and enjoy the fellowship with them. And when I got there, they were like, can we help you with something? Well, yes, I'm here to worship. Certainly, but that others. This, when we talk about systemic racism, if you'll allow me, we're not talking about just police officers and their relationship with blacks in general. We're talking about a system, systems that affect us on different levels, whether it's education, whether it's loans, whether it's housing. When I was in Benton, I pastored in Benton for 14 years, and I was blessed. My wife's a nurse at the VA. I've worked 2-3 jobs since I got out the Marine Corps, so we were doing pretty good, and we lived in a community there in Benton, pretty elite community, to say the least. And I remember fishing in our neighborhood lake, and there's a guy, and he's very popular in the city of Benton, owns a restaurant, but we were there fishing by house. We were there catching and tearing up those catfish. We were getting them. All of a sudden, when he came home, now we were in a boat in the lake. We weren't in his yard. And as a resident in the community, I paid dues, so we were able to fish there. And so we were fishing, and all of a sudden this man, he walks back and forth from his water fountain in his backyard with a bucket to the side of the house. He does this for 45 minutes or more. Finally, he gets the nerve, and he comes down to where we are, and he says, you guys caught your limit? And I just kind of smirked at him, and he said, you're going to catch all of their fish. And I said, okay. I scratched my head. Now, mind you, I'm with a classmate I hadn't seen in 20 years, and he is not saved, and he is ready to fight. And we're on a boat, and I'm like, man, sit down. I'll handle this. You're going to have to go back to Seattle soon. I'll deal with this. And so this guy, he walks down, and I said, well, sir, please listen. Don't bother us on the lake. We're just out here fishing. And so he keeps on. And I said, please don't bother me when I'm fishing. My wife don't even call me when I'm on the lake. Please don't. He pressed it. He pressed it and pressed it. And you're going to catch all the fish. You're going to catch all their fish. I said, all of whose fish? So he pointed to a neighbor's house. Well, they built these nice fish boxes. I said, man, listen, these folk live in a $500,000 home. They have sense enough to know that if they want fish to call their own, they can either get out here like I am with a hook and a pole, or they can get an aquarium. Okay? Now, that's just to say one of the issues we've dealt with. Yeah. And so there are several issues that we experience that others don't hear about. And I'm not saying that we want to call ourselves victims, but reality is what it is. And I hear so many of these same stories when our people are stopped. And when I was a police officer, my phone number was in the phone book. And sometimes guys would get stopped by the police officers, and they would call me, sometimes furious. And I would talk them down and say, listen, you have too much to lose. Please listen, this and that. And so this is something we've really been trying to, something new. But it's just, George Floyd, all his death it was just another pin in the whole scenario. Yeah. So that's where we are today.
I know I follow a lot of diverse voices, especially on Twitter. And I remember in the weeks after George Floyd, where this national moment was happening, there were two things going on at the same time. Is that there was, like you mentioned, within the African-American community, there was an intense grief and a recognition of the sorrow of this situation. And then at the same time, there was I think a well-intentioned on behalf of white people, there was a well-intentioned desire to understand it and to try to bring some peace moving forward. And I remember several of the more prominent African American people that I follow on Twitter said, I get it. I'm glad that white people want to understand, but we're still trying to process this. And it's hard for us to explain this to white people while we're still processing it. And one of the things, and I don't fault them at all for saying that, I say this to commend you. One of the things in the past few weeks on social media, you've been very open about, hey, talk to me. If you want to have this conversation, my phone's open, my screen's open, my heart's open, we'll talk about it. And that's hard, because I would imagine you have some people that just want to argue, but it's also very taxing in the middle of all of this to be open to try to move the ball forward. And so that's part of this, I think, is so important. And it's a conversation behind the scenes that you and I have had for years. And it's why I wanted to have it more publicly today. But just real quickly, we got just a few minutes left. How do we move forward, and how does it get better? Because I know through nobody specifically's fault, just the limitations, like you mentioned, the limitations of my childhood, and then my world opened up and got bigger later. And I've read a bunch on this, and I hear white people often say, and they ask African American people, what can I do? How can I make it better? And so one of the most important things is to be informed and to start listening. So how do we become better listeners without calling that guy that we were in 8th grade math with but haven't talked to in 25 years and saying, what do we do about this? Well, what is a way moving forward with a kingdom gospel view? What can we as individuals do right now to make it better? And we'll have to end there.
Man, I hate we have to end. I don't feel that I've given you any adequate answers yet, because it's that same thing, trying to internalize it myself. One of the biggest things that I encourage this in people, let us start looking like Jesus. Let us have righteous indignation. Let us be angry about what he would be angry about. You know, if I were to see Jesus right now walking through Jerusalem, and he would say something, more or less. And so I believe that we ought to have righteous indignation where we're angry about what God's angry about. But we also have to be clear that we only stand for what's right. If it's wrong on whatever plane it is, we have to disassociate ourselves with it. Man, listen. And you've seen me on Facebook, and I've had things where I've actually had people from my own community, and they blown up at me, and they were angry with me because of certain things that I said concerning, okay, this police officer was justified at this time. This police officer was wrong. Well, I've been behind the scene. I've been a police officer, but I've also been black. So I'm able to kind of deal with both sides of it. I think with us as Christians, we can't be political. We can't allow our politics to determine. I see that too often, and I don't just support something because it's a black thing. It has to be a black thing that has value. I don't just support a cause just because they say, okay, we got black and we tie black onto it. You know, people talk about Black Lives Matter. I saw where one of my classmates had sent something talking about, well, do you support Black Lives Matter? Well, the movement itself is one thing. But now an organization, I don't even know what the organization stands for. I don't know, because to me, Black Lives Matter, it's been mattering since 1969. And my dad would say it mattered since mid-1940s, you know, and my grandfather and so on. So to say that because an organization is built and founded off of someone who may not have the same principles we have, well, do you support that and this and that? We can find something wrong with every organization in the world, even in Christianity, because it's people who make Christianity what is bad now. So in closing, what I would say to this, Jason, try to ask that simple question: what did Jesus do? What did he do? Stop asking what would he do. What did he do? You go all through the scripture and find what he did. When he was dealing with people that were broken, what did he do? Woman with the issue of well, did he call her passed out and start I mean, the woman that had been caught in adultery, did he call her pass out and condemn her and say, well, yeah, you ought to be stoned? No, he didn't. He just said, hey, listen, no man condemns you. I'm not going to condemn you. And he forgave her of sin. We have to move with more compassion in the church. I was thinking about you this morning. Last thing. I was thinking about you this morning. I said, you know what? And I'm on political lines now. We have a Democratic Party, we have a Republican Party. And we have conservative, we have liberal. We as Christians, and I don't know about you or those that you pastor, but I'm not one-sided on anything. You understand what I'm saying? I have a compassion of Christ, but I have a love for right and wrong, if that makes sense. And I think with us in our churches, we've divided ourselves not only on racial lines, but we've done it on political lines. And so then we'll ignore things, because when you look at the Republican Party, they say, well, we're serious about this and pro-rights and all of this, and all of that's good. Liberals, well, we believe that every person matters and we care about the poor. All of that's good. We care about the poor. But there's a line in between where Christianity is not, he's not in allegiance with any one side. Christianity says, listen, what's right? Let's deal with that. Let's do it as Jesus would, because we know on one side, this is wrong, on this side, this is wrong. And I say to believers, and this is what I tell my church, always seek after that which is of Christ. Simply as that.
I'll tell you, like I told our friend Pastor Bruce Betts a couple of weeks ago, when you're in the middle, all that means is that you're going to get hit by the cars on both sides.
Well, I've been hit by them.
and that's why we wanted to have the conversation today. Man, brother, I thank you so much for your time. And I love, this is stuff that we've hashed out over the years and just sort of evolves. But the moment was too important for us not to have this conversation in front of some people. And hopefully it'll just prompt more conversations and cause people to be more like Jesus moving forward. And I love that as the way to end today. Let's just be more like Jesus.
That's what we need to be, brother.
All right, man. I think we're about to time out on our Zoom time limit, but I thank you so much, and love to your congregation and all good things there, and love to your family. You guys keep doing the good work there.
And I'm glad you're in it like that. I love you, brother. People need to hear that. I love Jason Call.
Love you, man.
But all right, brother. Take care, man.
Take care. Thanks, brother.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.